She's barely human, the billionaire murmured, switching languages like a weapon. The glass in Nora's hand trembled, but not from fear. Around them, silverware chimed softly, oblivious to the moment a line was crossed. He laughed, certain the words were safe hidden behind privilege and accent. He never saw her eyes lift. He never noticed how still she became. What he didn't know was that every insult landed perfectly, translated, catalogued, remembered. In a room built on money and silence, the weakest person held the sharpest truth. And in seconds, the balance of power would turn quietly, irreversibly against the man who believed language was his shield. The clinking of silverware against fine china at the Kensington, New York's most exclusive rooftop restaurant always sounded like a countdown to Nora. It was the sound of money she didn't have eaten by people who didn't care. Nora adjusted the collar of her stiff black uniform. It was a size too big, hanging loosely off her slender frame, making her look even more fragile than she felt. Her name tag slightly crooked read Nora. But to the clientele of the Kensington, she didn't really have a name. She was just a mechanism that delivered Filt Minion and refilled sparkling water. "Table 4 needs attention." Gavin, the floor manager, hissed into her ear as he walked past, not breaking his stride. "The VIPs have arrived." "Don't mess this up, Nora. The owner is watching tonight." Nora nodded, keeping her eyes down. "Yes, Gavin." She knew who was at table 4. The reservation had been the talk of the kitchen staff all afternoon. Omar Al-Sida, man whose net worth was discussed in billions, not millions. He was in New York to close a deal that would reshape the city's skyline. He was young, devastatingly handsome in that cruel, untouchable way, and known for a temper that could end careers with a snap of his fingers. Sitting across from him was Preston. Nora felt a cold shiver crawl up her spine when she saw the name on the reservation list earlier. Preston distinctively lacked a last name in the reservation system, but everyone knew him. He was a shark in a three-piece suit, an American investor who specialized in hostile takeovers. Nora took a deep breath, smoothing her apron. She picked up the bottle of Chateau Margaux 2015, a bottle that cost more than her rent for the next 6 months, and approached the table. The view from table 4 was breathtaking, overlooking the glittering expanse of Manhattan, but the men at the table had no interest in the city. They were locked in a staring contest. Omar sat with a relaxed posture that screamed dominance. He wore a navy Bioni suit that fit him like a second skin, a platinum PC Felipe watch catching the candlelight on his wrist. Preston, older with silvering hair and a face reamed by too much expensive scotch, looked tense. "Gentlemen," Nora said, her voice soft, trained to be unobtrusive. "May I pour the wine?" Neither man looked at her. It was as if a ghost had spoken. Omar waved his hand dismissively, a gesture one might use to shoo away a fly. He didn't break eye contact with Preston. Nora stepped forward, her hand steady. She began to pour the deep red liquid into Omar's crystal glass. She focused on the task, the perfect pour technique she had practiced for hours. Twist the wrist, catch the drop with the napkin. Perfect. As she moved to Preston's glass, Omar finally spoke. But he didn't speak to Preston, and he didn't speak in English. He leaned back, took a sip of the wine, and switched to rapid-fire Arabic, his voice low and mocking. "Look at this place," Preston Omar said in Arabic, his eyes sliding over Nora with a look of utter boredom. "They charge $1,000 for a steak, but they hire staff who smell like the subway." Nora froze just for a microsecond. Her hand holding the bottle twitched. A single tiny drop of red wine escaped the lip of the bottle and landed not on the tablecloth, but on the very edge of Preston's cufflink. It was a microscopic mistake, but in the Kensington, it was a capital crime. Preston slammed his hand on the table. "You clumsy idiot." Nora flinched, pulling the bottle back. I'm so sorry, sir. I'll get a club soda immediately." "Get away from me." Preston barked, wiping at his sleeve as if the wine were acid. Omar chuckled. It was a dark, throaty sound. He looked at Nora, for the first time his dark eyes narrowing. He saw the fraying threads on her collar, the scuffed leather of her cheap work shoes, and the exhaustion under her eyes. He switched languages again, this time to French. He assumed naturally that a waitress in New York might know English and maybe Spanish, but certainly not the dialect of the Parisian elite. "She looks like a frightened rat," Omar said to Preston in French, smiling cruel white teeth. "It is pathetic. People like this, they are barely human. They exist to serve us, and they cannot even do that right." Preston, who evidently spoke enough French to understand, laughed nervously, eager to please the billionaire. "Hard to find good help, Omar. You know how it is in the States. Everyone thinks they're a star." Nora stood there, the heavy bottle in her hand. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, a frightened rat barely human. The words burned. But they didn't burn because they were insults. They burned because she understood every single syllable. She knew Arabic because her father had been stationed in Dubai for 6 years. She knew French because her mother was born in Leon. She lowered her head, playing the part. "I will fetch the manager, sir." "Do that?" Omar said, switching back to English, his voice dripping with disdain. "And tell him I want a waiter who knows the difference between a table and a trash can." Nora turned and walked away. The walk to the kitchen felt like a mile. Her face was burning, but her eyes were dry. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. She needed this job. Her father's medical bills were piling up on the kitchen counter of their tiny apartment in Queens. The nursing home was threatening eviction. She pushed through the swinging doors into the noisy, chaotic kitchen. "What happened?" Gavin demanded, seeing her face. "I spilled a drop," Nora whispered. Gavin closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. "God help me. Stay here. Don't go back out there. I'll send Thomas." Nora leaned against the cold stainless steel counter, closing her eyes. She could still hear Omar's laughter in her head, barely human. If only he knew who she really was. If only he knew that 5 years ago, before the scandal that destroyed her family, she had sat at tables just like that one. She had worn silk, not polyester. But that life was gone. Now she was just the help. Or so she thought. 20 minutes later, the situation at table 4 had shifted. The atmosphere was no longer just arrogant. It was conspiratorial. Thomas, the replacement waiter, had come back to the kitchen looking pale. "They sent me away," he told Gavin. "They said they want privacy. They're discussing the Meridian deal." Nora's head snapped up. The Meridian deal. It was a name she hadn't heard in years. It was the project that had ruined her father. A massive international infrastructure project involving shipping lanes in the Mediterranean. Her father, Arthur Caldwell, had been the lead consultant until he was framed for embezzlement. He had lost his reputation, his money, and eventually, after the stroke, his mind. And the man who had testified against him, the man who had provided the false documents. Nora didn't know the name then. She only knew he was an up-and-coming shark. She peered through the small round window in the kitchen door. She looked at Preston. Really looked at him, the silver hair, the nervous tick in his jaw. It was him. Preston was the man who destroyed her father. And now, he was sitting there, about to sign a deal with Omar Al-Said. A cold, hard resolve settled in Nora's stomach, replacing the fear. This wasn't just a bad shift anymore. This was fate. Gavin, Nora said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Thomas can't handle table 4. And you can?" Gavin scoffed. "You nearly ruined the guy's suit." "Thomas doesn't speak German," Nora said. Gavin looked at her, confused. What, they just switched to German? Nora lied, or half lied. She knew Preston's file. He liked to use German lawyers to hide assets. "I heard them asking for sparkling water in German when I walked by. If Thomas goes out there and doesn't understand, they'll be insulted. You know how international clients are." Gavin hesitated. He looked at the busy kitchen, then at Thomas, who was shaking with anxiety. He looked back at Nora. "You speak German?" "Fluently," Nora said. "And Arabic and French and Italian and Mandarin." Gavin blinked. For a second, he looked at his waitress as if he'd never seen her before. Then the stress of the dinner rush took over. "Fine, but if you drop one more thing, Nora, don't bother coming back for your tips." Nora grabbed a fresh pitch of ice water. She checked her reflection in the metal surface. She didn't look like a rat anymore. She looked like a hunter. She walked back out to the floor. The restaurant was buzzing, but the noise faded into the background as she approached table 4. She moved silently, refilling their glasses without asking. As she did, she listened. They weren't speaking German. They were speaking English, but they were speaking in code. Business jargon meant to confuse outsiders. But then a third man joined them, a short, balding man with a briefcase. "Ah, Herr Müller," Preston said right on time. So the German connection was real. The 3 men began to speak. Herr Müller, the lawyer, opened a folder thick with documents. He spoke in rapid, legalistic German. "The contracts are structured as you asked," Preston Müller said, tapping the paper. "The liability is entirely hidden in the subsidiary. If the deal goes south, Al-Sad takes 100% of the loss. You walk away with the commission instantly." Nora stood by the service station just 5 feet away, folding napkins. Her heart pounded. It was a scam, a classic shell company scam. Preston was selling Omar a toxic asset, and he was using the language barrier and complex legalese to hide it. Omar picked up the contract. He frowned. He looked at Preston. "My German is rusty," Omar admitted in English, "but my team reviewed the summary. The summary is accurate." Preston smiled, his face a mask of friendliness. "It's a standard liability clause, Omar. Just legal protection for both of us." Then Muller muttered something in German under his breath. Barely audible, like taking candy from a baby. Preston suppressed a smirk. Omar looked at the papers, pen in hand. He was about to sign away millions. He was about to be humiliated just like her father was. Nora gripped the water pitcher. She hated Omar. He was arrogant, cruel, and had treated her like dirt. He deserved to lose his money. He deserved to feel the sting of failure. "Let him sign it," a voice in her head whispered. "Let him burn. It's karma for how he treated you." She watched the pen hover over the paper. The ink was about to flow. But then she looked at Preston, the man who had framed her father. The man who was smiling that snake-like smile. If Omar signed this, Preston would win. He would get richer. He would destroy another victim. The enemy of my enemy is my opportunity. Nora made a choice. She didn't walk to the table as a servant. She walked to the table as an equal. She didn't pour water. She placed her hand firmly on the contract, covering the signature line. The silence at the table was instant and deafening. Omar looked up, his eyes wide with shock and rage. "What do you think you're doing? Take your dirty hands off my papers!" Preston stood up, his face turning purple. "Manager, get this crazy woman out of here." Nora didn't flinch. She looked directly into Omar's dark, furious eyes. "You don't want to sign that, Mr. Al-Sad," she said, her voice clear and projecting across the silent section of the restaurant. "Excuse me," Omar hissed, his voice dangerously low. "You are a waitress. You pour water. You do not speak. I am a waitress who happens to know that Schuldübernahme in Section 4, Paragraph 2 does not mean standard liability," Nora said, pointing at the German text she was covering. Herr Müller dropped his pen. It clattered onto the china plate. Omar froze. What Nora switched to flawless high-speed German, addressing Müller directly. "You should really be more careful, counselor. Section 4 transfers all historical debt from the shell company to the buyer immediately upon signature. You are selling him a bankrupt shell, not a shipping lane." Miller's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. Nora turned back to Omar, switching to English. "They aren't partnering with you, sir. They are dumping a toxic asset on you. If you sign that, you lose $200 million by tomorrow morning." Preston lunged forward. "She's lying. She's crazy. She's just a disgruntled employee." Omar didn't look at Preston. He looked at Nora. The arrogance was fading from his eyes, replaced by a sharp, calculating intelligence. He looked at her hand on the paper, then at her face. "You speak German?" Omar asked. "And Arabic?" Nora said, her gaze hardening. Which is why I know you think I look like a frightened rat. And I know you think my shoes are cheap." Omar winced. For the first time all night, the billionaire looked embarrassed. But Nora continued, "My cheap shoes are currently standing between you and the biggest financial mistake of your career. So do you want to keep insulting me, or do you want to read Section 4? The entire restaurant was watching. Gavin, the manager, was frozen by the kitchen door, his jaw hanging open. Omar slowly reached out. He didn't push Nora's hand away. He gently lifted the corner of the paper she was holding down. He looked at the German text. He pulled out his phone, snapped a picture of the paragraph, and sent it to someone. Seconds later, his phone buzzed. Omar looked at the screen. His face went pale, then red with fury. He slowly stood up. He was a tall man towering over Preston. "Preston," Omar said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Why does my translator tell me that this woman is exactly right?" The silence in the Kensington didn't last long. It was broken by the sound of Preston scrambling to gather his papers, his face slick with sweat. "It's a misunderstanding, Omar." Preston stammered, backing away, as the tall billionaire stepped closer. "Standard boilerplate, my lawyers. They must have put in an old template." "I had no idea." "You had no idea." Omar repeated, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "You sit here, drink my wine, smile in my face, and try to steal $200 million. You take me for a fool." Omar grabbed the bottle of Chateau Margaux, the same one Nora had nearly dropped earlier. He didn't pour it. He simply let go of it, right over the open briefcase where Preston had stuffed the contracts. The bottle shattered inside the leather case. Red wine soaked the documents, the folders, and Preston's tablet. "You are done," Omar said, his voice ice cold. "I will blacklist you from every bank in New York, London, and Dubai. If I see you in my city again, I will have you arrested for fraud." Preston stared at his ruined briefcase, shaking with rage. He looked up, his eyes locking onto Nora. The fear in his eyes vanished, replaced by pure, venomous hatred. "You," Preston spat, pointing a shaking finger at her. "You little waitress trash. You think you're clever. You have no idea who you just messed with. I will make sure you never work in this town again. I think you have enough problems of your own." "Preston, Nora," replied, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Security guards, alerted by the commotion, finally arrived. They escorted a sputtering Preston and a terrified hair miller out of the restaurant. The diners watched in awe. It was the kind of scene usually reserved for movies playing out right in front of their salads. As the elevator doors closed on Preston, Omar turned back to Nora. The rage vanished from his face, replaced by a look of intense curiosity. He looked her up and down, really seeing her for the first time. Not as a servant, but as a person. "You saved me a fortune," Omar said, quietly. "Why?" "Because he's a liar," Nora said simply. "And I don't like liars." "Most people would have stayed silent," Omar noted. "You risked your job." Before Nora could answer, Gavin, the manager, stormed over. His face was a mask of panic and fury. He didn't look at Omar. He looked directly at Nora. "Get out," Gavin hissed. Nora blinked. "What, you're fired?" Gavin said, his voice trembling. "You humiliated a VIP guest. You caused a scene. You disrupted the entire dining room. Look at this mess. I just saved Mr. Olsed from a fraud." Nora argued, shock washing over her. "I don't care if you saved the Pope," Gavin shouted, losing his composure. "Preston is a regular. He brings clients here every week. You just cost this restaurant thousands of dollars in future bookings because you couldn't keep your mouth shut and pour water. Hand in your apron. Get out now." Nora felt the floor drop out from under her. Fired. Just like that. The medical bills flashed in her mind. The rent, her father's medication. Without this job, she was destitute in a week. She reached behind her neck to untie her apron, her hands shaking. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not in front of these people. She is not fired." A deep voice cut through Gavin's tirade. Gavin froze. He turned slowly to face Omar Olsed. "Excuse me, sir," Gavin squeaked. "I said she's not fired," Omar said, buttoning his suit jacket. "Because she quits?" Omar turned to Nora. "You speak 6 languages, yes?" Nora said, holding her apron. "German, Arabic, French? What else? Italian, Mandarin, and Spanish she listed. And I can read Portuguese." Omar nodded, a small, impressed smile playing on his lips. "And do you understand business or just translation?" "My father was in finance," Nora said carefully. "I grew up reading balance sheets." "Good," Omar said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy black metal card. It wasn't a credit card. It was a business card with gold embossing. "I need an executive assistant. My current one is incompetent and she doesn't speak German. Be at my office at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. The Al Sadd Tower on 57th Street penthouse floor." Gavin's jaw dropped so low it nearly hit the floor. So Gavin stammered, She is currently the only person in this room I respect." Omar interrupted, his eyes flashing. He turned back to Nora. "The starting salary is $150,000 a year plus bonuses. Is that acceptable?" Nora's breath hitched. That was more than 3 times what she made here. It would pay for everything. It would save her father. "Yes," Nora breathed. "That is acceptable." "Good," Omar said. "Wear something professional." "And Nora?" "Yes. Don't be late." He turned and walked out of the restaurant, his entourage trailing behind him. Nora stood alone in the center of the dining room, clutching the black card. Gavin stared at her, his face a mixture of jealousy and regret. Nora untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on table 4. "I quit," she said to Gavin. And for the first time in 5 years, she walked out of a room with her head held high. The Al Sadd Tower was a monolith of glass and steel that pierced the New York sky. It was a fortress of wealth. Nora stood in the lobby at 7:45 a.m. She had spent the entire night preparing. She had dug through the back of her closet to find her old clothes relics from her life before the scandal. She found a charcoal grey pencil skirt and a cream silk blouse that had somehow survived the years. They were slightly out of style, perhaps a season or 2 old, but they were high quality. She pulled her hair back into a severe, sleek bun and applied the last of her good lipstick. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like Nora Caldwell, daughter of Arthur Caldwell. She tapped the black card Omar had given her against the security turnstile. The light turned green. Access granted. The elevator ride to the 91st floor made her ears pop. When the doors opened, she stepped into a reception area that looked more like an art gallery than an office. White marble floors, abstract sculptures, and a view of Central Park that cost millions. A woman was sitting at the reception desk. She was stunningly beautiful, with blonde hair styled in perfect waves and a suit that cost more than Nora's entire life savings. Her nameplate read, "Lydia, Executive Office Manager." Lydia looked up, scanning Nora with a critical eye. She saw the older clothes, she saw the determination, and she immediately didn't like it. "Can I help you?" Lydia asked, her voice sugary sweet but cold underneath. "I'm Nora. Mr. Al Sadd asked me to meet him here at 8. Lydia raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Al Sadd is in a conference call with the board of directors. He doesn't have appointments with walk-ins." "It's not an appointment," Nora said, handing over the black card. "I'm the new executive assistant." Lydia stared at the card, her perfect mask cracked for a second. But I didn't approve a hire. I handle all staffing for Omar." "Apparently, he handled this one himself," Nora said calmly. Before Lydia could argue, the double doors to the inner office swung open. Omar walked out, looking tired but sharp. He was followed by 3 men in suits who looked stressed. Omar saw Nora. He stopped. He looked her over, noting the change in attire. He nodded, satisfied. "You're early," Omar said. "Good." "Who is this Omar?" Lydia asked, standing up, a forced smile plastered on her face. "She claims she's the new EA. She is," Omar said, not looking at Lydia. "Lydia set her up at the desk outside my office. Get her a laptop and access to the server. But Lydia protested, her voice rising slightly. We haven't vetted her. We don't have a resume. For all we know, she could be a corporate spy. You can't just hire a stranger off the street. Omar turned slowly to Lydia. She saved me $200 million last night while you were at a Pilates class. Lydia, she stays. If you have a problem with that, you can leave. Lydia shut her mouth instantly, her face flushing pink. Of course, Omar. I'll get her set up. Nora followed Omar into his office. It was massive, dominated by a desk made of dark mahogany. Don't get comfortable, Omar said, sitting down and immediately opening a file. We have a crisis. The Italian suppliers for the steel beams in the Dubai project are threatening to strike. They say we missed a payment. I know we didn't. I need you to get on the phone with them. Now, Nora asked. Yesterday? Omar snapped without looking up. The contact is Joseph Rossi. He's screaming in Naples right now. He refuses to speak English to my team because he says we are arrogant Americans. Fix it. Nora didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for a script. She didn't ask for permission. She walked to the side desk, picked up the phone, and dialed the international number listed on the file. She put it on speaker so Omar could hear. The phone rang twice. A gruff, angry voice answered in Italian. What do you want? I told you no more steel until I see the money. Nora took a breath and switched to a flawless Neapolitan dialect, rougher, faster, and more emotional than standard Italian. It was the dialect her grandmother had used when she was angry. Signor Rossi. Nora said, her voice sharp and authoritative. Stop shouting. It gives you wrinkles and makes you sound like a fishwife. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Omar stopped typing and looked up. Who is this, Rossi? Asked, confused. This is the woman who is looking at the wire transfer receipt right now. Nora lied smoothly, improvising. The money left our bank 3 days ago. The problem isn't us, Rossi. The problem is that your bank in Naples clears international funds like a tortoise with a broken leg. Now, do you want to keep screaming? Or do you want me to email you the SWIFT confirmation code so you can go yell at your own banker? Rossi sputtered. You have the code. I have it right here, Nora said. And if you delay the shipment one more day, Mr. Al-Sad will cancel the contract and buy steel from Germany. The Germans don't scream Rossi. They just ship. A pause. Then Rossi's voice came back, completely changed. Respectful. Send the code, Signora. If the bank has it, the steel moves tonight. Gratia Giuseppe, Nora said, and hung up. She looked at Omar. Omar was leaning back in his chair, staring at her. The room was silent. You speak Neapolitan dialect, he asked. My grandmother was from Sorrento, Nora said. She had a temper. You just saved the timeline for $1 billion skyscraper in under 2 minutes. Omar said, shaking his head. Lydia has been trying to reach him for 3 days. Lydia probably tried to charm him in English. Nora said men like Rossi don't want charm. They want respect. Speaking his language shows respect. Speaking it tougher than him shows power. Omar's eyes softened. He stood up and walked around the desk, leaning against the edge, crossing his arms. Who are you, Nora? He asked quietly. Really? A waitress who knows international banking laws and speaks dialects from Naples, who knows shell company scams. You aren't just a random hire. Nora froze. This was the dangerous part. If she told him she was Arthur Caldwell's daughter, he might fire her. The scandal was toxic. I'm just someone who pays attention, Nora said, deflecting. I don't believe you, Omar said, stepping closer. But I don't care. Not yet. You have a job to do. Suddenly, the door burst open. Lydia stood there looking triumphant. She was holding a tablet. Omar. Lydia said, her voice dripping with fake concern. I did a background check on your new miracle assistant. I think you need to see this. Nora's blood ran cold. Lydia walked over and placed the tablet on Omar's desk. Her name isn't just Nora. It's Nora Caldwell, as in Arthur Caldwell's daughter, the man who embezzled millions from the pension fund 5 years ago. Lydia smirked at Nora. She's the daughter of a criminal, Omar. She's probably here to steal from you just like her daddy. Omar looked at the tablet. He saw the old news articles, the photos of Nora's father in handcuffs, the headlines screaming. He looked up at Nora. His face was unreadable. The warmth that had been there a moment ago was gone, replaced by the stone-cold mask of the billionaire. "Is this true?" Omar asked. Nora stood tall. She didn't flinch. "Yes, Arthur Caldwell is my father. But he didn't steal that money. He was framed by the man you almost did business with last night." "Preston lies." Lydia scoffed. "Preston is a respected investor. Your father died a disgraced crook." "Oh, wait. He's not dead, is he? He's in a state-run facility because you can't afford a private one." "That is enough," Lydia, Omar said sharply. He looked at Nora. "You lied by omission. You didn't tell me who you were." "You didn't ask," Nora said. "You asked if I could do the job. I just proved I can." "I can't trust you," Omar said, his voice low. "In this business, reputation is everything. If people find out my assistant is a Caldwell, then fire me," Nora challenged him. "Go back to Lydia. Let her handle Rossi. Let her handle the Germans. See how much money you lose next week." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Lydia was smiling, sure of her victory. Omar looked between the two women, the capable, mysterious outcast and the safe, incompetent loyalist. He picked up the tablet. He looked at the photo of Arthur Caldwell. Then he looked at Nora. "Get out," Omar said. Lydia beamed. "You heard him, Nora. Pack your things." "Not her," Omar said, looking at Lydia. "You, Lydia, get out of my office." Lydia's smile vanished. "What?" "I need to talk to Nora alone," Omar said. "Close the door behind you." Lydia stomped out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Omar stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "Preston framed your father." Omar asked, his back to her. "Yes," Nora said. "Preston and a group of others. They used my father as a scapegoat to hide their own losses. I've spent 5 years trying to prove it, but I didn't have the money or the access." Omar turned around. "And now you want to use my resources to fight your war." "I want to do my job," Nora said. "But if I happen to take down Preston along the way, isn't that good for you too? He tried to rob you yesterday." Omar smiled. It was a dangerous, shark-like smile. "I like you, Nora Caldwell." He said, "You are dangerous. Keep the job, but be warned. If you ever lie to me again, I will destroy you myself." "Deal," Nora said. "Good." Omar checked his watch. "Now we have a lunch meeting, and this one is tricky. It's with the Chinese delegation. They are very traditional. They don't like doing business with women." "I speak Mandarin," Nora reminded him. "I know," Omar said. "But do you know how to play mahjong?" Nora smiled. "Mr. Al-Sad, my father taught me to count cards when I was 6. I don't just play, I win." "Then let's go," Omar said, grabbing his jacket. "It's time to teach the world that Nora Caldwell is back." The Jade Chamber was not a restaurant. It was a private members-only club in Chinatown, hidden behind an unmarked red door. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and jasmine tea. Omar and Nora sat on one side of a square rosewood table. Opposite them sat Mr. Wang, the head of the Chinese Construction Consortium, and his nephew David, a young man who looked at Omar with open hostility. The meeting had been going poorly for an hour. Mr. Al-Saded David said in perfect English, translating for his uncle, "My uncle feels that your company is too aggressive. You want to build the port in 18 months. We say 3 years. Quality takes time." Omar tightened his jaw. 18 months is standard for my team. We have the capital. We need your labor force and permits." Mr. Wang leaned back, puffing on a cigar. He said something in Mandarin to his nephew. It was fast mumbled and dismissive. David smirked and turned to Omar. "My uncle says the timeline is impossible. He suggests we adjourn." Nora, sitting silently with a notepad, didn't move. But she had heard what Mr. Wang actually said. He hadn't said the timeline was impossible. He had said, "This desert prince is desperate. He needs this deal to save his stock price. We stall him, and next week we can charge him double. Omar looked ready to walk away. He hated being stalled. Tell your uncle that if he can't handle the timeline, I'll find another partner. Mr. Wang laughed when David translated this. He tapped the mahong tiles on the table. Mr. Al-Sad, David translated, my uncle suggests a game. In business, as in mahong, one must know when to fold and when to push. If you win, we do the deal on your terms. If we win, you pay us double. Omar looked at the tiles. He didn't know how to play. It was a trap. I accept, Nora said. Everyone froze. Mr. Wang looked at the woman he had ignored all afternoon. Nora Omar warned, whispering, Do you know what you're doing? The contract value is 400 million. Trust me, Nora whispered back. She looked at David. I will play for Mr. Al-Sad. David laughed. A secretary playing Master Wang. This is an insult, Nora replied in Mandarin. Not the textbook Mandarin of a student, but the crisp, formal dialect of Beijing business courts. It is only an insult if I lose, she said calmly. If I win, it is a lesson. Deal the tiles. Mr. Wang's eyes narrowed. The cigar stopped halfway to his mouth. He nodded slowly. The game began. The clacking of the tiles was the only sound in the room. Nora played fast aggressively. She built her wall of tiles with the precision of a surgeon. She watched Mr. Wang's eyes, not his hands. As they played, Mr. Wang and David spoke openly in Mandarin, assuming Nora's knowledge was limited to simple phrases. She plays like a child, David muttered. She is hoarding the bamboo tiles. She leaves her center open. Don't get cocky, Wang grunted. She has eyes like a hawk. Nora kept her face blank. She was hoarding bamboo, but it was a feint. She was baiting them. 20 minutes in the tension was unbearable. Omar was sweating slightly, watching the piles of money represented by the plastic tiles. Mr. Wang smiled. He reached out to place a tile. Pong, he announced. He was one move away from victory. David grinned at Omar. Prepare your checkbook, Mr. Al-Sided. Nora looked at the board. She looked at Wang. You are right, Mr. Wang, she said in English. The Desert Prince is desperate, but desperation makes people dangerous. She reached out and slammed a single tile onto the table. It was the White Dragon. Ma Zhong. Nora said softly. Mr. Wang stared at the table. He counted the tiles. A perfect hand, a 13 orphans sequence, one of the rarest and hardest hands to build. She hadn't just beaten him. She had humiliated him. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. Then Mr. Wang threw his head back and laughed. A loud, booming laugh. He clapped his hands. Good, he shouted in English. Very good. He looked at Omar. You have a smart woman, Al-Sad. Dangerous woman. We do the deal. 18 months. Omar let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. As they left the club, the cool night air hitting their faces, Omar stopped on the sidewalk. He looked at Nora. You hustled him, Omar said, a grin breaking across his face. You hustled the toughest negotiator in Shanghai. He underestimated the secretary, Nora said, shrugging. Everyone always does. Omar looked at her. The streetlights reflected in his dark eyes. For a moment, the boss-employee barrier thinned. He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. I don't, Omar said softly. Not anymore. Nora's heart skipped a beat. She felt a pull, a magnetic tension between them, but she pulled back. She couldn't forget why she was here. We should get the contract signed, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Right, Omar said, stepping back, clearing his throat. Contracts. But the victory was short-lived. As they got into the black SUV, Omar's phone buzzed with a notification. Then another, then 100. What is it? Nora asked, seeing his face go pale. Omar held up the phone. It was a push notification from the New York Financial Times. Breaking news. Billionaire Al-Sad hires daughter of disgraced felon. Investors panic. The article had everything. Nora's full name, her father's mugshot, and a quote from an anonymous source saying that Nora had access to Al-Sadid's sensitive accounts. "It's Preston," Nora whispered. "He found out." "My stock is dropping," Omar said, watching the numbers on his screen turn red. 5% in 10 minutes. The board is calling an emergency meeting. Nora felt the walls closing in. "I have to resign. It's the only way to stop the bleeding." Omar looked at her, his eyes hard. "Number Omar, listen to me," she pleaded. "I am poison to your brand. If you fire me, the story dies. You can say you didn't know." I said no. Omar growled. "Preston wants to isolate me. He wants me to throw you to the wolves so he can pick us off one by one. I don't abandon my people." "I'm not your people," Nora said. "I'm a liability." "You are my partner," Omar said firmly, "and we are going to war." The next morning, the Al-Sad Tower was under siege. Reporters camped in the lobby. The phones didn't stop ringing. Nora sat in Omar's office, the blinds drawn. She felt like the frightened rat Omar had once called her. But this time, the fear was fueling a cold rage. "It was Lydia," Nora said. Omar looked up from his laptop. "What the leak?" Nora explained. "The article mentions details from my personnel file. Only you and Lydia had access to that file. You didn't leak it. It was her." Omar picked up his desk phone. "Security escort Lydia Vance out of the building. Seize her laptop now." He slammed the phone down. "That deals with the leak, but it doesn't fix the problem. The board wants you gone, Nora. They are threatening to freeze my assets if I don't fire you by noon." "Preston is behind the board's panic," Nora deduced. "He's pushing them. We need leverage," Omar said. "We need to hit Preston harder than he hit us." Nora stood up and walked to the whiteboard. She began to draw a timeline. "My father," she began, "when he was framed, there was a ledger, a physical black book, where Preston kept the real accounts. He never destroyed it. He's too arrogant. He keeps it as a trophy." "Where is it?" Omar asked. "For 5 years I didn't know," Nora said. "But last night when I was hacking into Preston's shell company records, don't look at me like that. I learned a few things on the dark web. I found a recurring payment for a high-sea security storage vault. A bank vault." Number Nora turned to him. "A private vault in his penthouse. He keeps it close. We can't break into a penthouse, Nora. That's a felony. I'm a billionaire, not Batman." "We don't have to break in," Nora said. "We're invited." She slid a glossy invitation across the desk. It had arrived in the morning mail addressed to Omar, the winter gala hosted by Preston Holdings. "Tonight, 8:04 p.m., the penthouse at the summit." He invited me to gloat, Omar realized. "He wants me to come and kiss the ring. He thinks I'm defeated." "Exactly. Nora said he expects you to come alone, humble, and begging for mercy. He does not expect you to bring me. If you walk in there, the press will eat you alive," Omar warned. "Let them," Nora said. "While everyone is watching the scandal of the year, the Waitress and the Billionaire, nobody will be watching the library." "The library?" The blueprints of his penthouse show a panic room behind the library bookshelf. Nora said, "That's where the vault is. I need 10 minutes. "And how do you plan to get into a biometric safe?" Omar asked skeptically. "I speak 6 languages." Nora smiled. But it wasn't a happy smile. "One of them is code, but I need physical access. I need his fingerprint." "His fingerprint? Leave that to me." Nora said, "You just keep him distracted. Make him angry. When Preston is angry, he gets sloppy." The winter gala was an ocean of diamonds, champagne, and fake smiles. The elite of New York had gathered to celebrate their own wealth. When the elevator doors opened, the room went silent. Omar Al stepped out. He looked like a king in a black velvet tuxedo. And on his arm, wearing a blood-red gown that clung to every curve, was Nora Caldwell. She didn't look like a disgraced daughter. She looked like a queen. Her head was high, her makeup flawless, her eyes sharp. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The audacity. Preston stood in the center of the room holding a glass of scotch. When he saw them, his smile faltered for a second, then returned wider and cruer than before. He walked over, surrounded by his syphons. Omar, Preston boomed. And the help, I must say. You have balls bringing her here. I bring my friends where I please, Preston, Omar said smoothly. Friends? Preston laughed. Is that what we're calling liabilities these days? I heard your stock dropped another 2 points. Sad. Nora stepped forward. She stood toe-to-toe with the man who ruined her life. Hello, Preston, she said. Nora, he sneered. Here to refill my drink, or are you looking for a new mark now that Omar is sinking? I'm here to give you a chance to confess, Nora said, loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear. Preston laughed, a harsh barking sound. Confess to what being successful? To framing Arthur Caldwell, Nora said. Preston leaned in close. He smelled of expensive cologne and rot. Listen to me, you little gutter rat, he hissed in her ear. Nobody cares about your father. I buried him. And tonight, I'm going to bury you. I have security footage of you hacking into my accounts. I'm going to hand it to the FBI as soon as the dessert is served. Nora's heart hammered. He was bluffing. He had to be. Enjoy your night, Preston, she said. She reached out and patted his chest right over his heart pocket. It might be your last one as a free man. She pulled her hand away on her thumb, hidden by a layer of transparent synthetic skin, was a perfect replica of the latent print she had just lifted from his wine glass when he set it down on a passing tray. Excuse me, Nora said. I need to powder my nose. Don't take too long, Omar said, catching her eye. The sharks are circling. Nora walked away, the red dress flowing behind her like a trail of blood. She didn't go to the bathroom. She slipped behind a heavy velvet curtain and into the service corridor. She knew the layout left right down the hall of the library. She entered the dark room. It smelled of old paper and leather. She moved to the bookshelf on the east wall. She found the fake book, The Art of War, a Cliché. She pulled it. The shelf clicked and swung open. Behind it was a steel door with a biometric scanner. This is it. Nora pressed her thumb coated with the lifted print against the glass. Beep. Access denied. Nora froze. Come on, she whispered. She adjusted the angle. Maybe the smudge wasn't clean enough. She pressed again. Beep. Access denied. Damn it, she hissed. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Someone was coming. She had one chance left. She remembered something from her father's old lessons about Preston. He is a narcissist. He trusts nothing but himself, but he loves his voice. It wasn't just a fingerprint scanner. It was voice-activated too. She heard the footsteps stop right outside the door. Nora closed her eyes. She thought of Preston's voice, the nasal pitch, the arrogant drawl. She had a gift for languages, but also for mimicry. She leaned into the microphone. Open, she said, pitching her voice down, adding the growly rasp of a 60-year-old smoker. Authorization Alpha 1. The machine heard, click access granted. The heavy steel door swung open. Nora slipped inside the vault. It was small, lined with safety deposit boxes, and there, sitting on a pedestal in the center, was the black ledger. She grabbed it. Her hands were shaking. This was it. The proof. She turned to leave. But as she stepped out of the vault, the library lights flicked on. Nora froze. Sitting in the leather armchair, holding a silenced pistol, was Preston. He wasn't at the party. You really thought it would be that easy? Preston asked, aiming the gun at her chest. I knew you'd come for the book, Nora. I invited you. He stood up, cocking the weapon. Did you really think you could outsmart me? I speak the only language that matters in this world. Preston smiled. Power. Put the book down, he commanded, and then say goodbye. Say goodbye. Preston hissed, his finger tightening on the trigger. Nora didn't beg. She stared at the security panel behind him. You forgot one thing, Preston. I read the installation manual. She shouted a single word in Russian. Zashchita. It was the emergency override code. The vault recognized the voice command, and the room instantly plunged into darkness, replaced by blinding, strobing red emergency lights. Bang Preston fired wildly in the confusion. the bullet shattering a vase as Nora dove behind the heavy oak desk. Before he could fire again, the library doors exploded inward. Omar charged in, not waiting for the armed federal agents behind him. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man possessed. "Drop it!" The agent screamed, lasers dancing on Preston's chest. Blinded by the strobes and outgunned, Preston dropped the weapon. The handcuffs clicked, sealing his fate. As they dragged the screaming billionaire away, Omar rushed to Nora, pulling her into a crushing embrace. "I told you to wait for the signal." Omar breathed, his voice shaking as he held her face. "I saw an opening," Nora whispered, clutching the black ledger to her chest. "I took it." 2 weeks later, the steps of the Supreme Court were swarming. But this time, the headlines belonged to Arthur Caldwell, fully exonerated thanks to the evidence Nora had secured. Preston was facing 20 years in prison. As the cameras flashed, a black limousine pulled up. Omar lowered the rear window, looking more handsome than ever. "Ready to go?" he asked. "To the office?" Nora asked, sliding into the leather seat. To the airport, Omar smiled, handing her a new file. "We have a crisis in Tokyo, and I need a partner who speaks Japanese." Nora took his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. "I'll brush up on the flight." "Good," Omar whispered, kissing her knuckles. "Because we have a long life ahead of us to learn the rest." And that is how Nora Caldwell went from cleaning tables to running an empire. She proved that your worth isn't defined by your uniform, but by your mind and your spirit. Preston thought he could crush her because she was just the help. But he learned the hard way that the quietest people often have the loudest minds. Nora didn't just speak 6 languages. She spoke the truth, and that is the only language that matters in the end. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you do if you were in Nora's shoes? Would you have saved Omar, or let him sign the bad deal? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. We post new drama every single day. Thanks for watching.